Control, this is dispatch. Interrogation room 4 is locked down. Suspect was mid-confession when the victim walked in. I repeat, the alleged victim is alive. We need all units to verify identity. Something's wrong.
Detective Samuel Reyes had seen confessions before, rehearsed ones, sloppy ones, even tearful ones. But this was different. The man across from him, Daniel Rowe, wasn't crying or pleading. He was calm, too calm. Shirt slightly unbuttoned, wrists resting on the edge of the metal table, voice flat and deliberate. "I didn't mean to kill him," he said. "It just happened." The room was quiet except for the distant hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Reyes didn't interrupt. He let silence fill the space between each sentence, waiting for Daniel to unravel himself further. "He grabbed me first," Daniel continued, his fingers flexing just once. "I pushed him. He hit the sink. That was it." The statement matched the preliminary autopsy. Fractured skull, blunt force trauma. The victim, Thomas Lang, age Tice, 37. Found in the back of a rundown apartment on East 11th. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, just blood and tile. It looked like a case closed in real time. Reyes leaned forward slightly, pen ready. "So you're saying it was self-defense?" Daniel shook his head. "I'm saying it wasn't supposed to happen." That's when Officer Patel entered the room. No knock, no urgency, just pale and stunned. "Detective," she said quietly, "you need to step outside." Reyes frowned. "We're mid-interrogation." Patel didn't blink. "You really need to come see this." Daniel didn't move. His eyes tracked Reyes without panic, without fear, as if he knew what was about to happen. Reyes stood, opened the door, and froze. Standing in the hallway, under the buzzing ceiling light, was Thomas Lang, alive, breathing, looking confused but very much intact. He raised one hand and said, "Someone told me I needed to come here." That's when the camera feed glitched, just for 3 seconds. The hallway fell silent. Detective Reyes couldn't look away from Thomas Lang, not just because he was alive, but because he was exactly as described in the case file. Same black hoodie, same scar over the left brow, same chipped tooth barely visible when he spoke. And yet, Reyes had stood over his body hours earlier, had signed off on the crime scene, had watched the coroner zip him into a bag. "Is this some kind of joke?" Reyes asked, voice lower now. But Lang looked just as confused. "They said I was listed as deceased," he muttered, reaching slowly into his pocket. "I got this." He handed Reyes a folded piece of paper, a printed morgue ID slip with his name, date of death, and a photo. A photo of him, face pale and lifeless. Official. Sealed. Reyes took the slip with trembling fingers. Daniel, still seated in the interrogation room, didn't speak, didn't turn. He simply lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging something only he understood. Officers began murmuring. Patel stepped back, pulled her radio, requested confirmation from the ME's office. Static answered. No connection. Reyes turned. Back to Lang. "Where have you been for the last 24 hours? Lang frowned. "Home. Sleeping. I work nights. I didn't know anything until I got that call." "Who called you?" Reyes asked. "Didn't say," Lang replied. "Just told me I was on a list and needed to come in." Reyes turned toward the viewing room where the tape was being recorded, but when he looked through the glass, the feed was looping. Daniel, on screen, was sitting in a slightly different position, as if the tape was an echo of the past, playing just seconds ahead, and his mouth was moving, forming words no one had yet spoken. "Rewind the tape," Reyes ordered. Voice clipped. The technician hesitated but complied, fingers moving over the playback console. As the footage rolled back, something shifted. For a few seconds, Daniel wasn't alone in the interrogation room. A dark shape, just a blur at first, flickered, into view behind him, standing motionless. Then it was gone. No footsteps, no reflection on the glass, just a presence, undeniable and yet invisible to everyone in the room when it had supposedly happened. "Pause there," Reyes snapped. The figure was gone from the paused frame, like it had only existed between seconds. Lang, still clutching the morgue slip, backed away slowly. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said, voice barely a whisper. "I saw myself in the mirror this morning, and for a second, I wasn't alone." Reyes didn't respond. He stepped into the interrogation room where Daniel remained completely still. "Tell me who you are," Reyes demanded. Daniel finally turned his head. "I told you already," he said calmly. "I'm the one who made sure he'd walk in here." "You mean Lang?" "No," Daniel said. "You?" Reyes froze. A pulse of cold ran through the room. Outside the two-way mirror, everyone stared at the live feed in silence. And then, in the lower corner of the screen, the timestamp changed. Not in seconds, but in date. It jumped. Backward, a full day earlier. "Something's wrong with the system," the tech whispered. Reyes walked to the table, leaned in. "Why am I here?" he asked. Daniel smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. Something that didn't belong in any interrogation room. "You're not investigating this case," Daniel said softly. "You're a part of it." And outside, rain began to fall for the first time in months. Detective Reyes didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car outside the station, engine off, watching the rain bead across the windshield like it was the first time water had touched the earth in years. The timestamp error haunted him. Full day erased, just like that. But it wasn't just the tape. When he returned to his desk after the interrogation, his case notes had changed. Typed pages showed edits he never made. Names he didn't recognize appeared next to details that hadn't existed hours before. And worse, Daniel Lang's mugshot had vanished from the digital system. Instead, there was only an older image, dated 15 years prior, with a different case number and stamped with a red warning, "Do not reopen." Reyes dug through the physical archives, descending into the cold basement of the department, the fluorescent lights flickering like dying stars above. The folder for case 711X was there, brittle with age, half covered in dust and mildew. Inside were photos from a different time. Daniel Lang standing at the center of a burned-out warehouse, surrounded by officers Reyes didn't recognize, except one. Himself. Younger, thinner, same scar over the right brow. He flipped through the pages with growing dread. A death certificate, a coroner's report, a resignation letter in his own handwriting, and a note paper-clipped to the back of the file. "If he returns, do not speak to him. Do not believe him. And never ask why." Reyes staggered back, dropping the folder. His breathing quickened, a low ringing building in his ears. How could any of this exist? Had he worked this case before? Had he forgotten? Or had someone made him forget? The questions tangled like wires in his mind, and one thought pressed harder than the rest. Daniel Lang had come back for something, and Reyes might be the key. Back at his apartment, Reyes laid out the contents of the old case file across his kitchen table, like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. The photos, the reports, even the resignation letter, all bore signs of authenticity. His own signature, unmistakable. His handwriting, slanted and rushed. But he had no memory of writing it, no recollection of ever stepping into that warehouse, of ever knowing Lang before today. He picked up the photo of his younger self, staring directly into the lens, a strange expression on his face. Not fear, not anger. Resignation. In the background, behind the officers, stood a wall scrolled with something barely visible. Reyes enhanced the image digitally, isolating the words. A message written in red chalk. "This has already happened." A chill threaded through his spine. He checked the date on the coroner's report, February 9th, 2008. The same day, his personnel file claimed he had been on medical leave for a knee injury. His hospital record confirmed it. But now, with each document, that version of his past began to erode. Reyes called his old partner Donovan, now retired and running a bait shop 3 towns over. When he asked about case 7111X, there was a pause on the line. Then Donovan hung up. Minutes later, Reyes received a text from an unlisted number. "You opened it. That's on you." Every instinct told him to burn the file, to pretend this never happened. But beneath the fear, a darker curiosity took root. What kind of truth was powerful enough to be erased from every system, to turn seasoned cops into ghosts and memories into traps? Reyes stared again at the message on the photo wall. If this has already happened, then who had rewritten it? At 2:17 a.m., his apartment phone rang. No one had that number. He let it ring 5 times before answering. On the other end, nothing. No breath, no static, just silence thick enough to cut. Then, a voice finally emerged, distorted and slow, as if underwater. "Detective Reyes, you were never supposed to ask." He froze. Before he could speak, the call ended. Moments later, a knock at the door, sharp, deliberate. Through the peephole, no one, only a small envelope taped to the door, sealed in black wax. Inside, a VHS tape, unmarked except for a timestamp, 02/09/08/21:43, the same. Date as Lang's reported death. Reyes no longer owned a VHS player, but he knew where he could find one. At the precinct's evidence archive, buried in an unused tech room. He stared at the tape, hands trembling, adrenaline surging. Someone was feeding him pieces now. But was it a warning or an invitation? Against every rule of protocol and survival, he left his apartment that night, tape in hand, driving through near-empty streets toward the one place he swore he'd never return to after he left the force, the old District 12 station, shuttered after a fire gutted half the interior. But the basement storage, that room remained. As he approached the building, its silhouette emerged like a corpse in moonlight, quiet, hollow, and waiting. His breath clouded the cold air. In that moment, Reyes wasn't sure if he was investigating a case or being lured back into one he had already failed. The deeper he went, the more one thought haunted him. What if this wasn't just about Lang? What if Lang was only the key, and the real lock hadn't been touched yet? The old District 12 precinct had a smell Reyes thought he'd forgotten. Ash, mildew, and something else beneath it all. Something metallic, like dried blood clinging to scorched tile. He moved cautiously through the ruined corridors, flashlight flickering against crumbling walls, past lockers half melted by the fire. The building was declared structurally unsafe, yet somehow still intact in all the wrong ways, as if parts of it refused to burn, refused to die. He reached the basement door and paused, memories pressing against him like weight on his chest. That room hadn't seen a detective in nearly a decade, yet the lock turned smoothly. Inside, the old evidence archive sat untouched, exactly as he remembered. Shelves of outdated tech, confiscated tapes, boxes labeled with long-forgotten case numbers. Dust hung in the air like suspended time. He found the VHS player on a bottom shelf, plugged it into the wall's only working socket, and inserted the tape. The screen crackled to life. Static. Then an image. Grainy surveillance footage of an interrogation room. Not the room Lang had been in, but one just like it. A timestamp matched the tape label. The camera angle was high, casting long shadows on the floor. A man sat at the table, face obscured. Not Lang. Reyes leaned closer. The room in the video had no windows, no audio feed, just silent movements. The man looked directly into the camera, not accidentally, deliberately. And then he smiled, slowly. Reyes felt the hair on his arms rise. The man mouthed something. Reyes paused the tape, rewound it, played it again. Frame by frame. 3 words, impossible to misread. "Help me, Reyes." The detective stumbled back, breath caught in his throat. That tape had been recorded 6 years ago, before Lang ever died. Reyes didn't move for nearly a full minute. The words echoed not just in the stale air of the basement, but somewhere deeper, in a part of him that had buried more than just old cases. He replayed the footage again, hoping the low resolution had tricked him, that it wasn't real, that maybe someone had doctored the tape, but the expression was unmistakable. The eyes, hollow but aware. The lips, slow and deliberate. "Help me, Reyes." He hadn't even been assigned to that precinct 6 years ago. It made no sense. He scanned the case number scribbled on the tape's spine. Case 179F. He'd never heard of it. But when he pulled out the adjacent files, a cold jolt went down. His spine. Every single case on the shelf had a name that later ended up connected to Lang. Victims, suspects, witnesses, all intersecting like threads in a web. And at the center of it all, Lang's death. Except now, Lang wasn't dead. The records had said he was, the reports filed, the autopsy signed. Reyes had read them himself. But somehow, all that felt like a carefully orchestrated lie. Not sloppy, intentional, controlled. With trembling fingers, he pulled a manila folder from the shelf, marked "Confidential, Internal Use Only." Inside were transcripts, names, maps, even a list labeled "Locations Cleared, Do Not Return." One entry was circled 3 times. Interrogation Room 3A. He hadn't noticed it before, but that room was never listed in the precinct's blueprints. As if it had been added or hidden. The man on the tape. He had been in room 3A. And now Reyes realized something else. That room still existed, but the door to it, in the real world, had been sealed in concrete. Reyes drove back to the precinct without radioing in. He needed silence, needed time. The parking lot was half empty, and the building's lights glowed with the usual bureaucratic indifference. But something felt wrong. The air was too still. Inside, he walked past the main desk, past the holding cells, until he reached the lower level, where no one ever went after hours. Hallways narrowed, paint peeled from the corners. Old fluorescent, lights buzzed overhead like an anxious whisper. Then he saw it. A door, labeled 3A, barely visible under layers of scratched paint. It shouldn't have been there. Not anymore. The precinct's renovations from 2 years ago had supposedly closed off this entire wing. But the door was intact, not locked. He placed his hand on the cold metal and pushed gently. It creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. Metal table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner, unplugged. And on the table, waiting like it had never left, was a dusty manila folder with his name on it. Reyes. Inside, a transcript. But not just of an interrogation, of a confession. His own. Every line printed. Every word he'd never spoken. Things he'd never admitted to anyone. Pages detailed choices he made a decade ago during another case, one that had ended in a fire and in silence. At the very end of the file was a Polaroid, slightly curled from heat. The man from the video, but now the face was clear. It wasn't Lang, it was Reyes, himself, or someone who looked exactly like him. Same scar under the eye, same cufflink on the shirt. The timestamp read, tomorrow, 02:13 a.m. That was impossible, but so was everything else. He heard something behind him, a faint breath, and then a voice. You're not supposed to be here. He turned around fast, heart hammering, fists clenched. But the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no doors closing, just that lingering chill in the air, like someone had been breathing against his neck seconds ago. Reyes closed the file and shoved it into his coat. His mind screamed to leave, to forget, to pretend none of it ever happened. But his feet wouldn't move. His eyes kept drifting to the timestamp. Tomorrow, 2:13 a.m., and that face, his own. He took one last glance at the room, memorizing every object, every shadow. When he walked out and closed the door, the label, 3A, was gone. Just chipped drywall, no handle, no frame, like it had never existed. Upstairs, the precinct was quiet. Too quiet. Even for the hour. He walked past Officer Dana at the front desk, but she didn't look up, just stared blankly at the security monitors. Reyes paused. The screens were looping footage from 3 nights ago. He asked her what time it was. She didn't answer. Just blinked slowly, like she hadn't heard him. On instinct, he looked at the monitor behind her. One of the cells was occupied, a man pacing slowly. Reyes leaned in. The angle was poor, the resolution grainy, but he could see the scar beneath the eye, the cufflink, the face. Himself. Reyes bolted toward the holding area, but when he arrived, every cell was empty. He called for backup. No response. Walked back to the desk. Dana was gone. All screens, black, except one. Cell No. 3, the grainy figure still pacing, but now holding the manila folder. His folder. Reyes whispered under his breath, "This isn't possible." Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "You still have time to confess." Reyes stared at the screen as if it could explain everything, but it only deepened the madness. The man in cell number 3, his exact likeness, now sat calmly on the bench, staring straight into the camera. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. Reyes felt his breath shorten, as though something inside him was collapsing in slow motion. He stepped backward instinctively, but the lights above him flickered again. One went out, then another, a steady rhythm, like footsteps from the ceiling itself. As if something, or someone, was walking above the tiles, matching his breath. He forced himself to turn away from the monitors and bolted for the archive room, hoping to pull up previous reports to find even one shred of logic. When he scanned his ID, the door clicked but didn't open. A voice echoed faintly from inside the room. It was muffled but unmistakably his. "You already know what this is." Reyes kicked the door in. The lights inside flickered, then stabilized. The room was full of case boxes, unmarked, dusty, stacked with labels in red, classified 457W. One box sat on the central table, already opened. Inside was a VHS tape, labeled only Confession. He inserted it into the old player nearby. Static. Then his own voice, a younger version. Panicked. "I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was just following orders." The tape warped and cut out, but the screen didn't go black. Instead, it showed a still frame. Reyes, in an interrogation room, hands covered in blood, staring blankly into a mirror. Not at himself, but at someone behind the glass, watching. He didn't remember this, none of it. But he couldn't deny the fear. And deep down, a quiet thought began whispering, "What if I'm not the copy?" Reyes staggered back from the tape player like he had seen a ghost crawl out of the screen. His own voice, pleading, broken, confessing to something he had no memory of, echoed in his ears. And then came the sickening possibility that maybe this wasn't amnesia, or trickery, or some elaborate frame-up. Maybe he really had done something so horrific that his mind had buried it deep enough to forget. But if so, who was the man in cell number 3? A hallucination, a twin, a projection of guilt made flesh. The questions clanged against his skull like iron bars, while the silence around him thickened. He grabbed the box, clutched the tape, and ran back toward the surveillance room, heart pounding like a drum. But when he burst through the door, the monitors were dead, all of them, just static and black. The feed to cell No. 3 was gone. The chair was empty. Reyes rushed to the holding area. Empty. Not just cell number 3, but the entire wing. Desks overturned, evidence cabinets ajar, lights buzzing as if reality itself were short-circuiting. And then, on the ground near the exit, a folder. The same kind they used for internal transfers. On the cover, Reyes D, reassignment, Sector 9. Inside there was no paperwork, only a single photograph. Him, at a much younger age, standing in front of a crime scene with blood on his sleeves, smiling. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, stood another man. Identical face, identical build. But he wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at Reyes. And his eyes weren't smiling. For the first time, Reyes stopped thinking like a cop, and he started to wonder, had he just interrogated a man or a memory? The station was evacuated the next day. Officially, it was due to a gas leak. Unofficially, no one wanted to be in the building after what happened that night. The story was buried. No press, no reports, no disciplinary board. Just erased, like it never happened. Reyes was placed on indefinite leave. No badge, no gun, no answers. He moved into a motel on the edge of town, a place that smelled like mildew and old regrets. Every night, he replayed the tape, the one with his voice and the one with his silence. He watched the footage from cell number 3, frame by frame, pausing on the moment the man stood up and said his name. Reyes. It wasn't just recognition, it was ownership. As if the man wasn't saying, "I know you." He was saying, "I am you." And the deeper Reyes stared, the more blurred the lines became. The badge he once wore started to feel like a mask. The questions that once fueled his investigations now fed his insomnia. He stopped answering calls. He stopped trusting reflections. There were moments when he'd wake up standing in front of the mirror, not knowing how long he'd been there. His hands would shake, not from fear, but from familiarity. One morning, he found his own handwriting scribbled on the motel wall. Just one phrase, over and over. I was both. The clerk said he'd been checked in under a different name. Surveillance tapes were blank. And in the drawer of the bedside table, a file marked 117B. Inside, the same photo, same blood. But this time, the figure in the background was gone. Just Reyes, alone, smiling, and the date printed at the bottom, 2 weeks from now. Reyes left the motel that night with nothing but the file in his coat pocket. He didn't check out. He didn't pack. He just walked. The streets felt unfamiliar, even though they hadn't changed. Stoplights lingered too, long on red. Shadows stretched farther than the buildings that cast them. Every car that passed slowed down slightly, as if recognizing something in him. He reached the station, or what remained of it. The building had been closed off, windows boarded, doors sealed. But the light was on in Interrogation Room 2. He didn't have a key, but the door opened anyway. Inside, the table was clean. No blood, no restraints. Just a folder resting in the center, unmarked. He sat. The camera above blinked red. Recording. He opened the folder, expecting pages, records, fingerprints. But there was only a single photo. Himself, sitting exactly where he was now, looking at a folder. And behind him, in the reflection of the two-way mirror, a blurred figure. Watching. Reyes didn't turn. He didn't need to. He spoke without moving his lips. You remember now, don't you? The voice wasn't his. It wasn't the man's. It was both, Somewhere between confession and hallucination, something had changed. He realized that the interrogation had never really ended. He had been talking to himself all along, just in different forms. His guilt had taken shape. His denial had grown legs. And his truth. It waited patiently across the table. The walls began to flicker, the light humming louder. The red light on the camera shut off. The folder vanished. And the table. It was no longer there. Only the chair remained, and Reyes alone, staring at the mirror, waiting to become the reflection, once more. 3 hours later, the building was found empty. No power, no surveillance feed. The officers who investigated the site filed an incomplete report. No record of Reyes, no sign of entry. Only the faint smell of old coffee and one metal chair, still warm. The case was closed again, sealed, redacted and buried under archived footage with no timestamp. But 1 week later, an envelope arrived at the home of Detective Laurie Mitchell, the only officer still on medical leave from the night of the initial arrest. It had no return address, no fingerprints. Inside, a single photo, Reyes sitting in that room, staring directly into the lens. On the back, just one sentence, scribbled in the exact same handwriting as her own. The victim remembered first. Mitchell never returned to duty. She burned the envelope, but not before making a copy. That copy still sits in a file drawer beneath her kitchen sink, behind cleaning supplies, forgotten receipts, and a flashlight that never runs out of battery. Every few months, she hears a knock on her front door. No one's ever there. Just the sound. 3 short knocks, 2 breaths of silence, and once, only once, the sound of a chair scraping against tile, inside the house. Mitchell doesn't speak of that night, not anymore. But in her final note to the department, she left one question, circled in red. What if the real victim never died? The file was later reclassified as Case 457W. All officers who reviewed the footage that night resigned before morning. No formal statements were submitted, no copies were made, and yet, the mirror still hangs in room 2, spotless, cold, and waiting, for the next confession, for the next face to forget itself.